Have you ever been in a room where everyone assumed you had nothing valuable to say and then watched them lose everything because they refused to listen? Raina Carter sat in the glass conference room on the 41st floor of Bennett and Rowe, watching the most important interview of her life fall apart in slow motion. At 26, this shy girl had taught herself statistics while caring for her dying mother, passed their technical test with a 95% score, and still couldn't shake the feeling she didn't belong. Her borrowed suit jacket hung loose at the shoulders. Her resume had a gap where a master's degree should have been. And when Grant Halstead, head of data science, asked why someone without formal credentials thought she deserved to work at one of Manhattan's most selective data firms, every word she'd practiced vanished. I taught myself, she whispered so quietly he had to lean forward. Grant smiled, the kind that never reaches the eyes. Admirable determination. But this level of work requires institutional rigor, not self-study. Raina's hands stayed folded under the table, fingers locked so tight her knuckles went white. She'd spent 3 years taking care of her mother, learning code between hospital shifts, believing that competence mattered more than credentials. But in rooms like this, belief wasn't enough. Miles Bennett, the CEO, checked his watch. The COO gathered her papers. Ichair stopped taking notes. Then every screen in the room exploded with red alerts, and Raina saw something in those numbers that would prove this shy girl understood the truth better than anyone with a doctorate ever could. What happened next would cost the company $20 million unless someone found the courage to speak up. What happened next would cost the company $20 million unless someone found the courage to speak up. And before we continue, from all of us here, we want to wish you a warm and peaceful Christmas season. May your holidays be filled with love, family, and the kind of heartwarming moments that remind us what truly matters. Thank you for being part of our community. The alarm pierced through the room like a knife through silence. Project Orion, critical system failure, client contract terminated, estimated loss, $20,000. Miles Bennett rose from his chair, his composure cracking for the first time. Dr. Olivia Reed, the COO, grabbed her phone with trembling hands. Grant rushed toward the nearest monitor, his confident facade shattering. "That's impossible," he said, fingers racing across the keyboard. "We tested this model for 6 months. Every scenario, every edge case." Raina's hand froze on the door handle. She should leave. She'd been dismissed politely but completely. Yet something in those cascading numbers pulled at her, a pattern she recognized, the way some people recognize a melody they'd heard once in childhood. She turned back toward the screen. The room held its breath. "The error isn't new," she said softly. 5 small words, but in that frozen moment, everyone heard them. Grant spun toward her. "I'm sorry," what every cell in Raina's body screamed at her, to apologize, to shrink, to disappear. This was how it always ended, when she spoke up with people staring at her like she'd committed an offense just by existing. But the numbers didn't lie, and she'd spent too many sleepless nights learning their language to ignore what they were saying now. "Your active user definition," she began, her voice barely steady. "It's counting shared devices as separate users. The accuracy metrics were inflated from the start." Nobody moved. Then Grant laughed, a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "You're suggesting that an algorithm built by a team with advanced degrees and years of experience has a fundamental flaw that somehow escaped everyone except you, a woman who couldn't even finish her undergraduate degree." "Grant." Miles's voice cut through the tension like a blade through water. His eyes stayed locked on the screen. "Give her 60 seconds. "Miles, we need damage control, not speculation from," Dr. Reed began. 60 seconds. Miles repeated, then looked at Raina with an intensity that made her breath catch. If you're wrong, you leave this building and never come back. Understood? Raina nodded, her pulse hammering in her throat. She approached the screen, her hands shaking as she pointed at the data visualization. You're tracking active users by device identification codes. But look at the login patterns, multiple sessions from identical devices within minutes, each showing completely different user behaviors. Families sharing tablets, couples alternating phones. Your model treats every session as a unique individual, but they're not. You were measuring the same people multiple times and calling it growth. Grant stepped forward, arms crossed, defensively. That's a gross oversimplification. We implemented temporal clustering algorithms and behavioral fingerprinting protocols specifically to account for session overlap. But you didn't account for device inheritance patterns. Raina interrupted, then immediately looked down, shocked by her own boldness. When someone hands off a device midday, the behavioral signature changes, but the device code stays identical. Your model interprets that shift as user acquisition, when it's actually just usage redistribution within existing households. Miles moved closer to the monitor. Show me. Raina's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She wasn't authorized, wasn't supposed to touch anything, but she pulled up a visualization anyway, isolating 3 device identification codes. This tablet. 5 supposed users across 2 weeks. Morning sessions show children's educational games. Afternoon sessions display recipe searches and meal planning. Evening sessions stream adult content. It's not 5 separate users. It's one family sharing one device. The silence that followed felt like falling. Grant's jaw tightened. This is speculative interpretation based on limited. It's mathematically replicable, Raina said quietly. Run the same analysis on any random sample. The pattern repeats. Miles studied the screen for what felt like an eternity. Then he straightened, his expression unreadable. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Miss Carter. He turned to Grant. Full dataset analysis. I want your internal review by close of business today. Miles, she's not even, Grant started. Today, Miles said firmly. Raina felt the dismissal before anyone said it. She gathered her worn portfolio, cheeks burning. She'd spoken the truth. She'd shown them the flaw. And still she was being shown the door. The hallway outside was endless white walls and cold lighting that made everything feel sterile and unwelcoming. Raina found a bench near the elevators and sat down before her legs could betray her. She'd done it again. Pointed out the mistake. And just like at her last job, she'd be the one paying the price. Here, dear. An older woman in a neat cardigan appeared beside her, offering a paper cup of water. Her name tag read, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, Reception Services. Thank you, Raina whispered. Mrs. Evelyn settled onto the bench with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to be helpful without being intrusive. 23 years I've worked in this building, she said gently. You know what I've learned about places like this? They don't like mirrors, especially when those mirrors are quiet and show them truths they'd rather not see. Raina looked at her confused. The older woman's smile was sad but knowing. You showed them something they didn't want to face. That's dangerous work, child. Inspirational, but dangerous. What this shy girl didn't know was that Miles Bennett had a heartbreaking reason for listening a wound that had haunted him for 7 years. Raina was 3 blocks from the subway when her phone rang. Unknown number. Miss Carter, Miles Bennett here. I'm offering you a 48-hour paid consulting contract. You'll work with our senior data engineer, Ethan Brooks. Full access to the Orion dataset. If you verify your analysis, we'll discuss long-term options. Raina's mouth went dry. I understand. One more thing. Grant Halstead remains head of data science. You'll submit all findings through him. Any concerns, any discoveries, they go to Grant first. Clear through the man who just told her she wasn't qualified. Crystal clear, Raina managed. Tomorrow morning, 7:30. Don't be late. The next day, Raina stood in Bennett and Rowe's marble lobby wearing her temporary security badge. The receptionist verified her identification twice. Even waiting by the elevator, she felt every glance that said, "You don't belong here." To Raina Carter. A young man with kind eyes and a sticker-covered laptop bag approached. Ethan Brooks, senior data engineer. Come on, I'll show you your workspace. And ignore the stares, half are curious. The other half are irritated, they didn't catch the error themselves. He led her to a desk in the corner near the emergency exit. Not glamorous, but you've got direct server access and nobody hovering. Best spot in the building. So, Ethan said, you're the woman who walked into an interview and accidentally exposed a $20 million flaw. I didn't mean to. The best revelations never are intentional. He grinned. Listen, I reviewed your technical test. That 95% I've watched Ivy League graduates score lower. So whatever Grant said, forget it. Data doesn't care about credentials. It only cares if you're right. For the first time in days, something loosened in Raina's chest. The work consumed her. She pulled device logs, isolated behavioral patterns, built visualizations that told stories the raw numbers had been trying to tell. Ethan worked beside her, asking sharp questions, nodding when the patterns held firm. You're not just competent, he said on the second afternoon. You're legitimately brilliant. But every breakthrough had to be sent directly to Grant. Protocol, chain of command. She compiled a comprehensive 14-page analysis by 6 o'clock that evening, documenting 3 additional model vulnerabilities that could destabilize other active projects. Subject line: additional findings. Urgent review needed. The next morning, she was summoned to a leadership meeting, not to present, to observe from the back. Grant stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room, his slides polished to perfection. Miles sat at the table's head. Department heads listened with focused intensity. My team has identified several critical improvements to our user modeling framework. Grant began smoothly. By re-examining our device tracking protocols and implementing more sophisticated behavioral clustering algorithms, we can eliminate the accuracy inflation that compromised Project Orion. Raina's breath stopped. Those were her exact words. Her findings, her analysis repackaged into his professional presentation. Ethan leaned close. He stole every single point, word for word in some places. But Raina said nothing. Because this was what happened. The shy girl speaks up, and someone with credentials takes the credit. She'd learned this at her previous job when she'd identified a budget discrepancy and watched her manager present it as his own right, before letting her go for not understanding team dynamics. Grant finished to respectful applause. Miles asked 2 technical questions, both answered, using Raina's precise methodology without acknowledgement. Nobody looked at her. She might as well have been invisible. After the meeting, Raina walked past the break room. The door stood partially open. Grant's voice drifted out. She's got decent pattern recognition, I'll give her that. But people like her never last in environments like this. They don't understand how the system actually functions. And how's that? You need credibility to be heard. Real credibility comes from credentials and institutional validation, not self-teaching and determination. He laughed. She'll burn out or quit within a month. They always do. Raina stepped back, her hands ice cold. Mrs. Evelyn appeared beside her, arms full of folders. The older woman's eyes held understanding from decades of watching. "He's wrong, you know," Mrs. Evelyn said quietly, "about who survives in places like this." Raina looked at her. "The ones who last aren't the loudest or the most decorated. They're the ones who decide their voice matters, even when everyone in the room insists it doesn't. That's the most inspirational choice anyone can make." But Miles Bennett was about to reveal something that would change everything Raina believed about silence, truth, and the cost of both. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Miles called her into his office. The floor had emptied, except for the cleaning crew and a few people burning through deadlines. Raina's badge beeped at the security panel green light. She knocked anyway. "Come in." Miles's office was surprisingly modest. No trophy wall or expensive art. Just floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk buried under reports, and a single framed photograph turned away from visitors. "Sit down," he said without looking up. Miles finished typing, closed his laptop, then looked at her directly, not as a CEO evaluating a consultant, but as one human being to another. "I want to show you why I built this company." He withdrew an old folder from his desk drawer. "This is the reason Bennett and Rowe exists." Inside medical records, insurance denials, desperate email chains, and at the bottom a death certificate. Sarah Elizabeth Bennett. Age 27. Cause of death: anaphylactic shock due to adverse medication interaction. "My younger sister," Miles said quietly. 7 years ago this March. She went to the ER with a moderate allergic reaction. They checked her chart, saw she'd taken antihistamine before, with no complications, cleared her for standard treatment." He paused. "But the data was wrong. She'd already taken antihistamine that day. It was still active in her system. The dosage they administered caused a fatal interaction. Her heart stopped 11 minutes after injection." Raina felt tears burning behind her eyes. "There was a nurse," Miles continued. 24 years old. She told the attending physician something felt wrong, that the numbers didn't match what the patient was describing. He dismissed her, told her the chart was clear and she needed to trust the system. His voice fractured slightly. That nurse had been written up twice before for questioning authority. So when she saw the discrepancy that could have saved Sarah's life, she stayed quiet. He turned back to face Raina. "I built Bennett and Rowe because silence killed my sister. Because someone saw the truth and didn't believe they had the right to say it out loud. Because credentials mattered more than accuracy and hierarchy mattered more than lives." The office felt too small, too honest. "I heard what you did in that interview room," Miles said. "You had every reason to walk out. But you stayed. You spoke up. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "I'm not brave," Raina said. "I'm just terrible at staying quiet when numbers don't make sense." Something shifted in Miles's expression, almost a smile weighted with sadness. "That's not a weakness. That's integrity." The door opened without warning. Grant walked in, tablet in hand. "Miles, I've compiled the revised projections for tomorrow's presentation and—" He stopped when he saw Raina, his expression smoothed into professional neutrality. "I apologize. I didn't realize you were in a meeting." "We're just finishing," Miles said, closing the folder. Raina was providing an update on her findings. Grant's eyes flicked toward her. "Excellent. I'll need her complete final report by tomorrow morning so we can integrate her observations into the comprehensive framework." Integrate. Not acknowledge. Not credit. "Of course," Raina said quietly. Grant left. Miles studied her. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make yourself smaller than you are." "Because being small feels safer." Does it really? Miles asked. Or does it just feel quieter? She had no answer. Later, as Raina packed up, Mrs. Evelyn appeared with chamomile tea. Long day. Long year, honestly. Can I tell you something I've learned in my 23 years here? Mrs. Evelyn's voice was soft, but certain. Silence is the real thief. It steals credit. It steals truth. It steals the chance to save someone's life, or a company, or just one person's dignity. She patted Raina's hand. I've watched countless intelligent people walk through those doors. Most know how to talk filling air with words costs nothing. But very few know when to speak, when to risk everything for truth. What's the difference? Mrs. Evelyn smiled. Talking is filling silence. Speaking is changing what happens next. That night, Raina couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Sarah Bennett, about a young nurse who saw the truth and didn't trust herself to fight for it, about how one moment of silence could echo through 7 years. She thought about Grant's presentation, about her name appearing nowhere. She thought about Miles's question, why do you make yourself smaller than you are? Somewhere between midnight and dawn, she made a decision. She opened her laptop and began documenting everything time-stamped, detailed, irrefutable. Not a report for Grant to repackage. Not findings to be integrated without acknowledgement. Evidence, protection, truth. If they were going to use her work, they were going to know exactly where it came from. What Raina didn't know was that Grant had already made his next move, and this time he wasn't just stealing her credit. He was trying to erase her completely. The email arrived at 7:42 in the morning. Subject urgent. Security protocol violation requires immediate attention. Raina stared at her phone screen, her coffee growing cold in her trembling hand. Miss Carter, our Information Technology Department has flagged unauthorized access to restricted datasets under your temporary credentials. You are required to report to Human Resources immediately to address this matter with our legal team. This represents a serious breach that may affect not only your current consulting contract, but your future professional opportunities in the industry. Her hands went numb. Her vision tunneled. Unauthorized access. She'd only opened files Ethan had explicitly cleared her to use. She'd followed every protocol, double-checked every permission, unless someone had changed them after the fact. The Human Resources office felt smaller than the conference room, but twice as suffocating. 2 people sat across from her, Jennifer Chen from HR, her expression professionally neutral, and a man in a gray suit from legal whose name she didn't catch and couldn't remember. Miss Carter, Jennifer began carefully, can you explain why your credentials were used to access Level 4 restricted datasets at 11:47 p.m. this past Tuesday? I didn't access Level 4 files. Raina said, her voice steadier than she felt. I don't even have clearance for... The access logs indicate otherwise. The lawyer slid a printed report across the table, his finger pointing to highlighted timestamps. Your badge identification. Your login credentials. Multiple restricted files opened and downloaded to an external drive. Raina studied the timestamps, her mind racing. Tuesday night. She'd left the building at 8 o'clock. Ethan had walked her to the elevator, made a joke about getting rest, because tomorrow would be intense. I wasn't in the building, she said firmly. You can verify that through the physical entry logs. Badge entry logs can be contested, Jennifer interrupted gently. Digital access logs are considerably more difficult to explain away. Raina felt the walls closing in the familiar suffocating sensation of being trapped in someone else's narrative. This was happening again. Different company, different accusation, same inevitable ending. If this violation is confirmed, Jennifer continued choosing her words with obvious care. We'll have to terminate your consulting contract immediately. And given the sensitive nature of the data involved, we may be legally required to report this to. She didn't do it. Everyone turned toward the doorway. Mrs. Evelyn stood there, her cardigan buttoned neatly, her posture straight. Despite her years, her face calm but absolutely resolute. Mrs. Hart, this is a confidential personnel meeting, Jennifer began. I'm aware of what it is, Mrs. Evelyn said evenly. I'm also aware that Raina's badge never re-entered this building after 8:04 p.m. on Tuesday evening. I was at the reception desk. I personally log every after-hours entry for temporary personnel and consultants. Its company policy has been for 6 years. She pulled a small spiral notebook from her cardigan pocket. Tuesday night after-hours entries: Grant Halstead at 8:47 p.m. Ethan Brooks at 9:15 p.m. 0 entry for Raina Carter. The lawyer frowned. That doesn't necessarily explain the digital access, doesn't it? Mrs. Evelyn's voice remained quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of careful observation. How difficult would it be to clone temporary credentials when you're the head of data science? When you have administrative access to the very systems that track who's accessing what? Jennifer and the lawyer exchanged meaningful glances. That's an extremely serious accusation, Mrs. Hart, Jennifer said carefully. So is framing an innocent person for a violation they didn't commit. Mrs. Evelyn looked directly at Raina, her eyes encouraging. If you stay quiet right now, they'll use you as the convenient exit, the scapegoat. Is that what you want? Raina's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to leave quietly, to make this easier for everyone else. But she thought about Sarah Bennett, about a nurse who second-guessed herself when the numbers told her something was desperately wrong. About Miles's question, does being small really feel safer, or does it just feel quieter? This shy girl stood up, her voice clear and unwavering for the first time in her life. I want to see Miles Bennett, now. Miss Carter, that's not proper procedure. I have the right to address the CEO before any termination is finalized. Company Handbook Section 12, Subsection 4. She'd read it 3 times the night before, unable to sleep, preparing for exactly this moment. I want to see Miles Bennett immediately. Jennifer hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her professional mask, then reached for her phone. 10 minutes later, Raina walked into an emergency meeting she had no authorization to attend. The main conference room overflowed with people, Miles at the head of the table, Dr. Reed on his right, Grant beside her looking composed and confident. 2 board members visible on the video conference screens, and the client representative, the actual person whose $20 million had nearly vanished. Every face turned toward her when she entered. I apologize for the interruption, Raina said, her voice shaking but refusing to break. But I need to say something. And if I don't say it right now, people will keep getting hurt by systems that protect the wrong people. Miles studied her for a long, weighted moment. Then he gestured toward an empty chair. Speak. What Raina said next would either save her career or destroy the last shred of credibility she had left in this industry. Raina's hands trembled as she opened her laptop, but her voice remained steady. I know exactly why Project Orion failed. She began looking directly at the client representative on the screen. And I know why you're about to blame the wrong person for it. Grant leaned forward in his chair. With all due respect, Miss Carter, this is neither the appropriate time nor— Let her finish, Miles said quietly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Raina pulled up her original documentation, time-stamped, meticulously detailed, saved to her personal cloud storage the moment she'd written each word. The active user model contained 3 critical flaws, not just one. I identified all 3 in my initial analysis 48 hours ago. I sent detailed documentation to Grant Halstead as the established protocol required on Wednesday at 6:14 p.m. She rotated her screen toward the room. Here's my original email with full metadata. Here are my complete findings. She advanced to the next slide, her confidence growing with each word. Here's the presentation Grant delivered to leadership on Thursday morning. Identical findings. Identical methodology. In several instances, identical phrasing, but my name appears nowhere in the attribution. Dr. Reed's expression shifted from neutral to concerned. The board members leaned closer to their cameras, suddenly paying intense attention. Miss Carter? Grant said, his voice still smooth and controlled. You clearly don't understand how enterprise collaboration functions. When you're brought on as a temporary consultant, your insights naturally become part of the team's collective analytical framework. Then why did you alter my system access permissions on Tuesday night? Raina interrupted, her voice stronger now, clearer. Why did someone use credentials linked to my account to download restricted files? I never touched files specifically chosen to make it appear I was stealing proprietary company data. The room fell into absolute silence. That's a serious accusation without any substantive evidence, Grant said, but something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe fear. It's entirely provable, Ethan said from the doorway. He walked into the room, laptop open, his expression grim. I pulled the complete server logs early this morning. The IP address for those Tuesday night downloads doesn't match any device registered to Raina Carter. But it does match a workstation registered to the data science department head's office. He set his laptop on the conference table, rotating it so everyone could see the technical evidence displayed across the screen. You cloned her temporary credentials, Ethan said, looking directly at Grant without blinking. You used her access authorization to download files she had no clearance for. And your plan was to let her take complete responsibility for it while you presented her work as your own innovation. Miles stood slowly, his face unreadable but his voice cutting like ice through glass. Grant, is any of this true? Grant opened his mouth, closed it, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. I was attempting to protect the company's reputation. He finally said, his voice losing its smooth confidence. She lacks the background to understand the full implications of. She understood enough to prevent a $20 million disaster, Miles interrupted sharply. While you were busy explaining why her lack of a graduate degree made her unqualified to exist in the same room as your team. He turned to Dr. Reed, his decision already made. Suspend Grant immediately. Full internal investigation. I want every project he's touched in the last 18 months independently audited. Grant's face drained of color. Miles, you can't possibly. I can. I am. And you're fortunate I'm not pursuing legal action. Miles looked at Raina, really looked at her not as a temporary consultant, taking up space, but as someone who'd been right all along while everyone else was wrong. Thank you for refusing to stay quiet. For having the courage to speak when silence would have been so much easier. The client representative spoke from the video screen, her voice thoughtful. Mr. Bennett, we'd like to continue this contract, but only if Miss Carter leads the data integrity audit personally.